Dwight, have you seen the Squid Game? I was just asking Shane about it.
I've seen on YouTube. I have seen the red light, green light thing. I've watched it about 30 times.
It's good, man.
What is red light, green light?
It's a fun children's game. You didn't play that? I mean, granted, you grew up in Manhattan, so maybe it was just like, hey, when the red light goes, then you gotta go ask that guy for money. He says fish, you say stink, and he gives you the package.
Yeah, that was accurate rendition of what my childhood was like. Yeah,
that's what that's what his teacher sounded like.
Hey, listen, you gotta, little Shane, you gotta go down to the meatpacking district, and there's a guy that's gonna. Can you carry a pallet? It's just some stuff that fell off the back of the truck.
That voice reminds me also, just before you came on, I was also asking Chris if he had seen the Sopranos prequel movie, and I'm not even going to ask you if you've seen it. I know you don't watch movies.
Yeah, it's some movie about Cory Booker and Newark or something like that.
It was really bad. I was telling Chris, I think it's like Phantom Menace level prequel bad. It baffling. Every decision baffling, wrong, weird. A few kind of interesting ideas, some decent performances, but like mostly just kind of boring and what a slog. Joyless slog.
Everything is just fan service now, and just it's like taking the last. It's like eating fucking boot leather before your party in a pass in the fucking Rocky Mountains dies. It's just like every little bit of cultural currency is just being squeezed for profit, and it's like the contempt with which like Hollywood views us is just dripping. It's so funny. Again, not being a terribly good fan of the medium, I say this humbly, but that's my kind of perspective.
It's like when we were talking about the Disney Star Wars biomes thing, where it's just like the empty,
that's it, man.
Nothing happening. I kind of got that vibe doing this, and there was one moment that it gave me a recall to one of the Disney Star Wars products, which was the in the Mandalorian show, and me and Carrie were watching that a little while back, and I thought, it started strong, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and then it became very fan servicey and boring and shitty. But there's like one scene in which the Mandalorian is like walking through a Tatooine market, and in the foreground there's like a food seller, and he's selling fried salacious R crumbs, who are the little alien.
Wait! That's the name of the species. That wasn't his.
I don't know what the actual name of the species are.
You gotta come prepared for this.
But that's what I was saying. I was like, oh, those are. It's the little guy who's in Jabba's palace. Who was like, and it's like a sight gag, right? It's like a 2-second sight gag in the foreground, and I was like, oh, that's the and I was trying to think of the name, and I couldn't remember if the species had a name, and it took me a second. I was like, oh, honey, that's Salacious R. Crumb. And Carrie just looked at me just like with such dead eyes and just said like, okay, honey. And I realized like the reason why that's there is for men in my demographic to turn to their romantic partners to point like the fucking Leo DiCaprio meme and say that. And there was an exact replica of that in the Many Saints of Newark, where there's a
Salacious
spoiler.
Hold on. Fuck my headphones. There's a moment.
Fuck my headphones.
There's a classic moment in the latter half of The Sopranos where Uncle Junior is starting to experience dementia, and there's a scene at dinner with all of the family, and he keeps saying over and over again about Tony, like he never had the makings of a varsity athlete. And he says it like 4 or 5 times, and it really pisses Tony off, and he blows his top, and he screams at him, and it's clear like Junior has dementia, right? That's why he's repeating it. There's a dinner scene in this where the younger version of Junior says it about the teenage Tony Soprano. He's like, look at him. He doesn't have the makings of a varsity athlete. And I I did the same stupid point, even though I was totally uninvested in the movie at that point. I pointed at the screen. I was like, oh, that's the line from the thing. And I turned to Carrie. I was like, remember when Uncle Junior says that in season 5? And she was just like, okay, honey.
Jesus. Again, utter contempt for the audience. Utter contempt. Don't you like this? Don't you like this slop? Do you remember this? The little vestiges of the synapses barely firing in your brain.
There was a relevance here, and I'm going to bring us to it. There's a brief clip I'd like to show you guys. Please. From The Sopranos. I know you haven't seen it. Not major spoilers, hopefully.
I've seen it.
You've never seen The Sopranos.
I've seen everything.
Name one character from The Sopranos.
Richie Aprile.
Okay, all right, fine. That was good. You caught me off guard. Anyway, this isn't the final season. It's Tony sitting down with Phil, and our conversations today made me think of it. So let me see if I can get it.
This is business, Anthony.
Yeah, I know. But I'm talking to you here on a human level. There's a limit, Phil. Come on. Point where business bleeds into other shit. Feelings make things financially unfeasible.
Charles Schwab over here.
Oh, shit.
Oh, God.
No big laugh. Oh, fuck me. I had to scour my knowledge for anything Schwab related, and this is what I get. No good Schwab goes unpunished, okay?
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I have those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about a political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off his death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Hey, how you doing?
There he is. And we've got Chris.
Howdy. Hello.
Folks, tonight we're gonna talk about Schwab. All right, we're gonna go full in on Schwab. I think, for all of us, this was somebody that we had on like a very early list of just like people that were sort of picking out of the ether of that could be potential episode topics. And I know my relationship, and I think from our conversations, you guys share this. But if you were like in our generational group, you've probably, when you were a kid, saw the Schwab commercials, right? Like, yes. Charles Schwab commercials. It was a name that was just blanketed everywhere. And it, it was something that then like percolated to the back, to the front of my mind, over the last few years, and it occurred to me, like, who the fuck was this guy? It was somehow related to finance or Wall Street or something, and I realized I didn't really know anything about him. And then, of course, you look him up, and his net worth is something like $9 billion.
12.
Which 12.
Even better.
Yeah, probably the figure I was looking at was pre-pandemic, which is really upsetting to think about. But he's like, he's like the 200th richest person in the world or something like that. He's right in that range in the rankings, and he's had a very long career. He's done mostly the same kind of stuff, and like a lot of the fucking bastards that we've covered on the show, right? Like, he's also had his hand in a lot of different political maneuvers, which we'll get to towards the end. So thought it would be a good time to, like Dwight, you were saying, Schwab the deck. Also an incredibly funny name. Let's just get that out of the way. At the front. Schwab. Come on.
Schwab.
Everybody, if you're at home listening to this, pause it and just look in the mirror, say Schwab.
I didn't really get into Schwab. I don't think I Schwabbed before college.
Okay.
I was more of a post-Schwab kind of guy. I came in after Schwab, yeah.
You know, when you mentioned the commercials, the ones I remember, and you shared one of them actually in the Discord earlier, was remember those ones like from the early 2000s that was like the same kind of animation from that movie Waking Life?
Yeah, the rotoscoped ones. Yep.
Rotoscope, yeah.
Yeah, those are the ones I specifically remember. But no, those were on all the time, and I've never really known a whole lot about the person behind the commercials. But he's boring actually.
He's incredibly boring, too.
really
I like Schwab's earlier work.
You're more of an early Schwab guy?
The deep tracks. I like the Schwab. The self-titled Schwab. That was a good one.
Only real Schwab heads will know this one. All right. Well, Chris, maybe to get us started here, you want to maybe talk about early Schwab?
Sure, I got a little bit of background on the early days of Schwab here.
Age of Schwab. I'm sorry, I can't help it.
So yeah, he's old. He was born in Sacramento, California in 1937. His father was a lawyer. Sometime in his childhood, the family relocated to Santa Barbara. That's where he went to high school. He talks a lot about being dyslexic, but that like he didn't like he was like really struggled in school, but he didn't know at the time that he was dyslexic. He wasn't diagnosed until he was 40. But like he said, he had difficulty in school. He was the captain of his golf team in high school, and he says that that's the only reason he got into Stanford, which is where he went to college, because they were like, because he wasn't a good student apparently, and they were looking for, I guess, to round out their golf team, I guess. So he struggled, I guess, academically in Stanford in his first 2 years. He says that he failed freshman English twice. He did graduate in 1959 with a bachelor's in economics, and then got his Master's of Business Administration from Stanford School of Business in 1961. So then after getting out of college in 1963, along with 3 partners, he launched an investment newsletter called Investment Indicator, which cost $84 a year for a subscription, which, not adjusted for inflation, that is more than it currently costs for a year subscription to our Patreon. So I was curious. So I
You
threw
get
it
much
in,
better financial advice.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, a much better investment. Yeah, and I was curious, so I threw it into the inflation calculator because $84 seemed like a lot to pay in 1963 for a subscription to a newsletter, and adjusted for inflation, that is $750 and 97 cents in 2021 dollars. And so then he grows this fucking newsletter or whatever throughout the 60s, and then in 1971 they incorporated the company behind the newsletter in California as First Commander Corporation. It reminded me of it's like a very nautical sort of thing. It reminded me of like an L. Ron Hubbard type thing. Like
That's what a guy of that age would have named it.
Yeah, but they continued publishing this newsletter, and then also somewhere around that same time started began operating as a brokerage firm as well. In the next year, in 1972, he bought up all the firm's stock, bought out all his partners, I guess, and changed the name of the company to Charles Schwab and Company. Now, he likes to think of himself as a big innovator in the financial services industry, and Charles Schwab, the company, is considered the first discount securities dealer, and basically really what this means is that they did away with the commissions on trade. This began in 1975 when the Securities and Exchange Commission deregulated the securities market. And one of those major changes was to do away with those fixed commissions. And and this was Schwab's big innovation, I guess, was to market to individual investors and to not charge them commissions for their trades. And he did this by paying his brokers an hourly wage instead of by commission. So this was his big innovation, which was, I guess, just to pay his workers less. And there's no tears shed for the stockbrokers, but the discounted rates certainly weren't coming out of his personal profits. They were getting trimmed from the pay of the people in his company. But when he talks about the early days of the company, he likes to paint himself as this as an underdog, as a Wall Street outsider. He talks about how he couldn't get any funding because nobody wanted to fund their competitor. And he likes to say that he democratized investing. That's how he likes to
Fucking hell.
That's what,
It pisses me off so much when they use like the vernacular of like how there's some fucking great liberator or some shit.
Yeah.
but yeah, so this is he likes to like suck himself off about this type of thing, about how he made it easier for the little guy to get his foot in the door. Basically, that's kind of the way he talks about it. But I mean, really, what he did was just not charge the commissions, and then also like extremely aggressively market to like the working class and the middle class, as opposed to like some of the other brokerage firms from before that. And that's pretty much it. He's a boring guy with a boring story. The company expanded over the next few decades. They're now one of the largest banking institutions and asset managers in the world. And
Yes.
he's the very, been the very public face of this company. As Shane mentioned, in the 80s, he started appearing in their TV commercials, which he did for many years. He's basically been, at the head of the company, except for he sold it to Bank of America in 1983 and then bought it back in 1987.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, and then he also stepped down as CEO in 2003, and then like the board fired the new CEO like next less than a year later, and then Schwab took it back over before like finally stepping down as CEO permanently in 2008, I believe. Though I believe he's still executive chairman, like he's still very much involved in the company. But boring rich guy. He's not like cartoonishly evil like someone like a Peter Thiel, like we spoke about last week. He's like a quiet evil, more of a quiet,
Yes.
old money evil, aggressively evil in his political contributions, which we'll get into more later. But like, there's nothing salacious here. He hasn't killed anybody that we know of.
That we know of,
or anything like
qualify it for journalistic
course.
sake, yeah.
Yeah. He lives in Atherton, California currently, near Palo Alto, where Stanford is. I can't remember. We talked about Atherton a few episodes back. I can't remember who else.
Larry Ellison.
Oh, is that who lived there? Also, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Woodside's right next to it, and that's just
and it's the one, like, it's like the big Republican stronghold in San Mateo County. It's like the one, I believe, majority Republican voting zip code in the entire county or something like that.
Didn't he move? He moved from San Francisco, right, to there at some point. I thought I saw that. Like, and it was like this big deal that he had like moved, to be like, I'm leaving this like liberal bastion or whatever to go live among my people or whatever.
Right, exactly. But that's it. That's Schwab. Schwab himself is boring. It's just regular rich guy brokerage firm stuff. And
Did you watch the that one interview with him and David Rubenstein?
I loved it.
I couldn't stand it. This was like a recent, like one of the first hits I had first encountered on YouTube, looking up stuff for Schwab, and it's David Rubenstein, who's also like a fucking billionaire. He was involved in the Carlyle Group, and he has this whole setup at the beginning too, where he's like, I don't know how I became an interviewer. I was a businessman, and now I'm a journalist.
And maybe we can play a clip from it right now, because that part specifically in the beginning, where they're like playing a few like clips from the interview, but like the music that they're playing over it reminded me, like, the music is so out of place. It reminded me of like the music. Remember that show Cribs? Or like something they're giving like a tour of the house or something. Reminded me of the kind of music that might play, something like that, rather than two old rich guys talking about their
even their like suits were identical.
Yeah, they looked identical,
and they're just
their
both
hair.
So boring.
they just
unbelievably boring.
Both love the smell of their own farts. Like two guys that just can't get enough of themselves. That they're just like, let's get us on stage, put us in front of some cameras, definitely have nobody doing wardrobe and makeup, and let's go for it.
Well, I remember there's a specific part at the end of that interview where he's talking about, when they start talking a little bit about politics, and he's like they start talking about the wealth tax, or like taxing the rich at a higher rate or whatever. And of course, they're not fans of that idea, and he justifies that to himself as well as the audience, I guess, by talking about all the philanthropy he does, which like was like what he listed was like mostly like donating to art museums and stuff. Like,
right. And I think for him, and like I don't even know I think his gripe is like twofold about like the quote wealth tax or whatever. Is like, one, it would attack him as a billionaire or whatever, which if he can't live on like $1 billion, like you got a problem, buddy. But also like his business model or his company's business model is based off of like wealth management. And so like that would attack the business model of him and his, legacy and shit like that. So of course he doesn't want that. Now, and aside from all the things of blah, 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 class solidarity and making sure that, they can continue their supremacy and all that shit, but it's just bullshit. And I read this whole thing about like their business model because, and I'll try to summarize it. My impression, like you were talking about, Chris, is that like, the traditional kind of Wall Street folks or whatever didn't really want to have anything to do with him because he wanted to kind of get away from the club-like and kind of like social aspect of having a relationship with a broker. Like he didn't want for the brokers to be kind of like whining and dining these kind of middle class.
We're not going to give you any advice.
Exactly, which is fucking insane. If you are, I'll just say this. Never invest in your own stocks. Like, never just be like, hey, I really like this one stock, or I think Amazon is going to be whatever. Like, the day trading thing, it's such a stupid game to play unless you're like, I see no value in it. And if anybody that's listening to the Patreon episode from this last week will understand that, like, the self-directed investing thing is just like such a fucking scam and a waste of time. But it also, in kind of my opinion, plays on the kind of American radical self-determination that people are like, well, I do know best. And I do know what's best for me. And so that was a big part of their business model, was like eliminating the per trade, costs associated with like day trading and shit like that, or just doing your own trades in general. Like, remember when E-Trade came out and like started to come to prominence in the early 2000s and shit, and it was just like, oh, you can trade your own portfolio, and it would be like $9 or $10 per trade. Well, that fucking adds up, especially if you're like starting off or whatever and you don't have a lot of money, which is again who it kind of like appeals to. But their idea was that like, hey, we're going to do $0 per trade and you can have your money here. The reason they're able to do that was basically they made a commercial bank under the Schwab name. And the idea was it was just some place for investors that would otherwise be, engaged in wealth management and putting their money to Schwab, for somewhere for them to park their money, if, temporarily, or if they needed to, be able to make ATM transactions and shit like that. It became enormously profitable because it has no branches. It's like a completely online bank. But instead of being like kind of one of those newish banks that are like, hey, we're all online, like, whatever. It kind of carries the cachet of this like old school institutional investor sort of thing. So it just like feels a little bit different. My impression is that a lot of people got burned in like, in the 90s, kind of these middle class people that maybe, boomers that maybe had some money or something like that, or had some extra income and were like, well, we're supposed to invest. And they got burned by the cyclical nature of the stock market, and the savings and loan scandal,
exactly, in like the early 90s, late 80s.
Yes. And so they were probably just like, I'm getting burned by these individuals that like live in my town and shit like that, and it was crazy. And so I think that's where kind of they came to prominence from what I'm reading about. I read this whole article from the publication Institutional Investor called "Charles Schwab is quietly one of the biggest banks in America. That's a problem." It was from last year by Jonathan Kandel. And so this is how they were able to make their business model, was basically kind of cutting out the middleman and taking on some of that and absorbing that profit. And I want to pivot for us to talk quickly about like their commercials, because for those that are millennials,
he's a fountain of charisma, obviously.
I could, in that interview too, there's a moment where he's talking about like being in the commercials, and he makes such fucking hay out of it. You know what I mean? He's like, the marketing team said, I should be in the commercials. And I was like, gosh, I don't know what a big deal that would be. And then suddenly I was in it, and oh my God, it worked. Our sales, went up, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then you watch the commercials, and he's just like, I'm Charles Schwab.
Exactly.
Invest your money here. It's so fucking bad.
So I mean, Shane, you actually probably know more about this with like, video production and shit like that. But like in the kind of like early 2000s and even in like the late 90s, and then they've been doing like advertising campaigns for some time. But they've been doing a lot of like this, what is it called? The rotoscope technique, I guess, where basically the idea was that these were like real people talking in a very kind of like folksy real way, being like, it just didn't sit right with me that these guys were making so much, these brokers were making so much commissions, and I realized, well, where am I getting my money from and stuff? But they look like cartoons.
Yeah,
that's like the idea of it, and maybe it'd be helpful if we could play one of those right now because they're short. They're like fucking 15 seconds or whatever.
So I was talking with my broker the other day. It was the usual small talk, how's the kids, how's the family, all that. And then it dawned on me. When you think about all the years I've been paying those big commissions on everything we've bought and sold, were we really discussing my kid's future or his kid's future?
They should have like a Charles Schwab commercial with that rotoscoping technique, but it's like it's Alex Jones's bit from Waking Life.
Or it's just from like a Scanner Darkly, and Charles Schwab turns into like a giant cockroach because he's on amphetamines.
I woke up one morning and I was was a cockroach, but my investment portfolio was safe. So yeah, but the idea of this in marketing to kind of like middle class Americans was that like investing is something. Not only is investing something that's available to you and is more approachable, but also you actually know enough to be able to do it yourself. Right, it makes me cringe just thinking about like, them tugging on those feelings of radical self-determination.
I mean, if just to quickly interject too, I mean, and Chris, when you were talking through about like the timing and the history of it, I mean, the quote unquote innovation here is like basically a reaction to like a form of deregulation in the stock trading market, and the emergence of this as a sort of DIY investment thing is concurrent with the total evisceration of the social safety net in Reagan's 80s. Like that's what's happening. So the idea then that like you should be investing as an individual person, right? As like, again, somebody from the working class or middle class, who maybe has like a very small amount of money, squirreled away somewhere, right? Like you need to invest that because that's not, you don't have those safety provisions that you had previously, right? Those are gone. Now the best thing to do is to invest it. And it really is.
Those are gone because we lobbied to eviscerate them.
Right, exactly. And it's predatory. I mean, it's the same as any other like, contemporary like retirement scheme, right? As opposed to like a more robust social security or private healthcare insurance as opposed to fucking, some kind of universal medical system. It's all part of the same fucking swamp.
Yes. So one of the things that I really wanted to like highlight is the way that they responded to COVID-19. And they have I should mention firstly that their CEO, fuck, his name just evaded me. Bettinger? Their CEO, what the fuck is his first name? Hang on.
Gale.
Walt. That's odd. Their CEO, Walt Bettinger, has a really weird relationship with Charles Schwab himself, who is the chairman of the board, where he talks about like how they have offices next to each other on the 18th story of their San Francisco headquarters. And I just want to read quickly from this Institutional Investor article, the weird kind of like relationship that they have. And again, for Charles Schwab, a guy who's 84 and is still like extremely involved in his business, which is insane to me because I would just be fucking, hiking or sailing.
Just
or something
be
like
rich.
Just be rich.
It's
fucking, but instead, anyway, so it says here, most of this transformation has taken place over the dozen years that Bettinger, 59, has been CEO. Yet he maintains a deference bordering on filial piety for 83-year-old founder chairman Chuck Schwab that other chief executives might find unnerving. Both have offices next to the top floor of Schwab's 18-story San Francisco headquarters. The two are in constant communication, by phone or in person, or through lengthy, detailed work memos that Bettinger passes on for the chairman's approval or comment twice a month. Until recently, it was every Friday. The latest missive was 16 single-spaced pages.
Oh my God.
He reads every word, says Bettinger. A win for a man who was not the founder's first choice to become CEO. Again, like that's just insane to me. That again, and I really understand why the author here used that term filial piety, because it's like to have to like kiss the ring of this guy. Like basically, you know how like psychopaths in business like use the technique of like mirroring to like endear, you know, like that to me, just like this is screaming that that he's just like, yeah, I just the way that I maintain my space and my position in this company is to just give him whatever he wants. That's what it sounds like to me, which is very fucking crazy. But one of the fucking insane things that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic is the way that they treated their employees. And I'm going to sum this up, and I'm going to read from something in a second, but I'm going to sum this up by saying that basically, you know, in early March, in the beginning of the quarantine, and when we all started like reeling about this fucking respiratory disease that was killing people, you know, the question was for these kind of large institutions, these large, you know, multinational conglomerates, is what do you do with your workforce? Obviously, you know, exploitation is always, you know, at the forefront of the minds of the executive committee. But like, also, you want them to be alive, and you want to have business continuity. So I'm reading here from this website called Skyview Partners, which is like an investment banking kind of website or whatever. But they talk about...
That sounds like a in-flight magazine.
Yes, it sounds like something that's a
like
shell company.
that you'd read only in business class, you know?
Exactly. And so they said here, basically it says, after month in COVID-19 hell, Charles Schwab spends $27 million to placate staff, RIAs, and investors. I'll explain what RIA is. And an amount dwarfed by $37 million spent to keep 3 M&A deals chugging ahead. And basically what they're explaining is like Charles Schwab in the last 20 years has like gone on this tear of doing acquisitions, basically. They bought USAA, which is like a huge retirement fucking institution. They bought TD Ameritrade, which was like one of their biggest competitors, which in my opinion should have been fucking, you know, antitrust 101. Like, but instead, you know, it's just, you know, this huge acquisition. But what they're saying here is like they spent $37 million to like on investment banking and consultants to keep these mergers and acquisitions continuing, yet they hemmed and hawed over spending $27 million to like keep their staff safe. So it reads here, the San Francisco broker coughed up cash to quell rare internal strife in March as workers faced battle conditions and couldn't all shelter in place, as trading exploded and retail calls spiked 16% and many workers shared desks in cramped cubicles. And so the term that they used before was the term RIA. So RIA it stands for Registered Investment Advisor. So these are like people that would be managing your money and stuff like that. And there's a website called RIABiz.com.
I got something from RIA Biz too.
Oh boy!
I'm glad you explained what the fucking RIA is, though, because I was having trouble parsing it.
That's what it was. So I mean, basically, it's like Reddit or whatever for registered investment advisors, which is like not very generous to say. But yeah, basically, they said here is that like the CEO Bettinger said like, hey, we understand. I got it. Let me find this direct quote. Hang on. Schwab spokesman Rob Farmer has not replied to 4 emails seeking comment. Again, this is like in the beginning of the pandemic. But sources passed on a company-wide email to RIA Biz that was written by Bettinger to employees. And it says here in his email, Bettinger said his hands are tied. Schwab technology doesn't permit staffers to work from home without significant drop-offs in service levels. It reads here, the reality is we do not have the ability to send everyone home due to the both technical and practical capabilities without creating the potential for significant interruptions in our ability to be there for our clients. Says, in a twist, COVID-19 may actually compel some Schwab telecommuters to begin working in the office. Bettinger writes in the email, it's trading at about $31 today, despite tremendously positive results. Not surprisingly, our clients have turned to us for help in this environment, and we've been there to support them, says Peter Crawford, who's the CFO of Schwab. The $43 billion in core net new assets brought to Schwab during the first 2 months of 2020 represents the strongest start to any year in our history.
Now, one of the things, by the way, that Charles Schwab himself, again, like boasts about, or like that he was some kind of innovator on, was like being one of the first among these brokerage firms to to switch to like doing things over the internet and doing things like remotely, like I guess whatever, like back in the early to mid 90s in the first place.
Exactly. Which is insane. And in fact, like I read something that their like 1996 website trading platform was like a crazy innovation or something like that, which by default, I guess it would be. It says, in a twist, COVID-19 may actually compel some Schwab telecommuters to begin working at the office. Bettinger Wright is in the email. So it's saying like, actually, anybody that is telecommuting might have to come to the office. It says, because, again, this was March 13th. Think about like what was happening in March 13th, 2020. Because of our business needs, the potential need for other colleagues to work from home, and our remote access capacity, some employees who are currently telecommuting may be required to work on site as we manage our remote access capacity. Can you imagine that if you've been working from home forever for Charles Schwab, and then all of a sudden a fucking pandemic happens and they're like, actually, you need to come into the office.
All hands on deck.
Exactly. But again, listening to what the CFO said, they took on, just in the first 2 months of 2020, $45 billion more dollars in net assets that they're managing. That's insane to me. It says a Schwab staffer says colleagues are concerned whether leadership is making the right call under such an unusual threat. This could be a real nightmare for them if employees start contracting COVID because they don't like the people working from home. We're in unprecedented times and shouldn't be operating under the same policy as we would in any normal circumstance. And so Bettinger, the CEO, goes on to say, first, we must maintain a safe and healthy work environment for you. Second, and at the same time, we must be there for our clients, who are also trying to navigate these very challenging times and who now need us more than ever.
That was, I remember that really tumultuous and scary time at the very beginning of the quarantine when so much was up in the air. And the first thing I thought was like, what's going to happen to my Charles Schwab accounts?
My investments. It's pretty just stunning. And especially at the same time, their biggest competitor, Fidelity, was saying, everybody who can work from home, go work from home. So it's either that, they just didn't want to because of like ideology. Charles Schwab didn't want that they didn't want to do that. That hurt. That they didn't want to do that because of their ideology, or because they failed to sufficiently prepare for a situation in which the core of their work culture needed to change rapidly. Now, as a result of this, and I'm just skipping forward here, now 95% of their workforce works from home. So they have gone nearly completely, and I can't find it now, but it was like, but basically it says like, now the CEO like sometimes doesn't even, he doesn't wear suits and he doesn't even shave sometimes when he comes into the office because there's like no one there and he doesn't do much business travel. So it's just like, so if you did that now, why did you do that in the first place? Why did you have to put the employees through that much stress? For what? Lending itself to, for me to say, like, it was probably more of like an existential and ideological, hard line that they just chose to take. So that's that. They really schwabbed it up with that one.
It's a shame too because especially if they were gonna make everybody still come to the office, they still could have implemented like regular testing. Like a nasal swab. It's low hanging fruit, but I had to go for it. I had to go for it.
Fuck.
Well, Dwight, it's interesting you bring up ideological positions because and Chris, you alluded to earlier, right? Like Schwab himself seems pretty boring. He doesn't do any of the outlandish, weird things with his wealth, right? He has a very large house and he has nice things and all of that. But he's not as transparently ghoulish as some of the people that we have talked about on the show. But he's.
Wait, I haven't Googled Charles Schwab Epstein.
Do
yet.
it.
I'm doing that right now.
There's no
This
way.
is on air. This is this is
Everyone
live.
tuning in live right now. We're going to the videotape here. Chris, what do you find? Chris is Googling right now. Typing in approximately 65 words per minute.
I'll have to read this to get the I don't know. It doesn't. I'm not finding like a personal relationship, but I am seeing something about the Charles Schwab, the company, being subpoenaed in some way.
Oh, I do see this.
Oh,
Yeah.
for Epstein's financial records. Yeah. So,
Interesting. God damn it.
All right.
It's everywhere, man.
All right. I was also looking up Charles Schwab Benghazi to see where he was on that particular day. I mean, if you could probably tell. But Charles Schwab is a Republican. Would you
What?
believe it or not?
No way.
Being the astute businessman that he is. So basically, after he really starts making his fortune in the 80s and 90s, ever since then, he's been a pretty consistent donor to the Republican Party in all of its variant forms, right? So that means a lot of money to big presidential candidates, but also into the RNC, these different like action funds, and then later, as we'll get to after Citizens United, right, like into these like huge super PACs and stuff. But just for a little bit of starters, also I should mention a lot of this information that I get like similar to a lot of the guys when you look in trying to figure out where they've put their money in various campaigns and things, right? It's often, again, it's through these like different like soft ways, right? There's a certain limit on what they can individually contribute directly to political campaigns. A lot of times too, and a lot of the filings and stuff that I was looking at, right? It would be money from him and his wife, Helen Schwab, who is his second wife.
Well, his name came up last week in the research I did for Peter Thiel.
Yes. I was. That's one of the places I want to get to.
Please,
But just to start off, right? In the 2000 election cycle, he donated $390,000 to the Republican Party, to the Bush campaign.
A lot of money.
So that's just the starting grounds, right? This is kind of like peanuts, right? To where we're gonna get to. And Chris, as you had just mentioned, right? The next big jump seems to be in 2008, but especially after that, right? In the midst of the Obama years, he's donated quite a lot of money to this weird, shadowy, dark money group called Americans for Job Security. Again, this weird,
Americans for good things. That are good.
Right, exactly. Just bullshit, totally, whatever, nonsensical, like, phrasing. So you mentioned that in reference to Peter Thiel in our last episode, which was episode 96, and the reason why I'm numbering it is this is kind of like a laundry list of a number of people that we've covered on the show, and you actually look into the filing. So Thiel, I believe, had given $500,000 to that fund. The number one donor was Charles Schwab, and guess how much he put in?
I know, so I'll let Dwight guess.
I give up. More than that.
Yes, much more than that. About $9 million in a 3-month period.
What the fuck?
Which was all used to run ads against Obama. Do with that what you will.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
So, a few other names on the list worth mentioning. Richard and Helen DeVos.
There we go.
Are in the $1 Million Club. And we
Classic.
talked about them back in episode 34. Richard Kinder.
Yeah, there you go.
Gave $200,000. Dan Wilkes gave $60,000, and his brother Ferris Wilkes gave $125,000. And we talked about those guys on episode 47. Vince McMahon.
No, that's way
and
back.
His wife.
It's an early episode.
We gotta
gave
stop doing episodes.
$10,000. That was episode 14. We talked about them. And then, of course, the one that we haven't talked about that will keep cropping up here is Sheldon Adelson. The other mega donor.
Rest in piss.
Yeah, so again, $9 million were given in a 3-month period. And around that time, they ran $8 million of like ad buys and ad production. So more or less directly, that was Schwab's contribution. Now, moving ahead a little bit to the 2015-2016 cycle, him and his wife Helen on Open Secrets, I found gave about $1.5 million to the Republican Party.
Damn.
Now, that might seem a little low compared to what we're just talking about, but there's more money to get to. Now, interestingly, I found this funny just for my own amusement. Schwab was not initially a supporter of Trump. He had his money on somebody else in the race.
Ooh.
And apparently he was being courted, I guess because he had thrown so much money around in the previous election cycle. There was like a list of people who all of those Republican candidates were courting. Again, the big ones on the list were like Adelson, right? People would go and literally like kiss the ring and like, sit around. He was, this sort of kingmaker figure. And Schwab was as well. And
Who
so there
was
were a number of
Schwab's
people.
first pick in 2016?
Okay, hang on.
I'm guessing Cruz.
But he's boring, so I might think Kasich, but I don't. But Kasich's less.
Smart money's not on Kasich. Yeah, Kasich was never a
I could see a Jeb.
Yeah, he was.
I'm gonna go with Jeb.
He was a friend of the George W. Bush administration.
Please clap.
Yes!
It is Jeb
Yes!
Bush. And I have to read this because it's just really funny to me. Again, if you kind of put yourself in the mindset of that weird competition that was going on at the time. This is a piece from Politico from 2015, October 2015 by Eliza Collins. And the title kind of says it all, but I want to read it. It's a short piece. After being wooed by Rubio, Charles Schwab to help host Bush fundraiser.
Imagine being wooed by Marco Rubio.
Yeah. So just imagine like all the petty rivalries going on here, right? So reading from the article, influential investor Charles Schwab, who has been heavily courted for weeks by Florida Senator Marco Rubio's campaign, is planning to help host 2 fundraising events for rival Jeb Bush in California later this month, according to an invitation obtained by Politico. The 78-year-old Schwab, who boasts an estimated net worth of $6.4 billion, now, as Chris, as you mentioned, it's doubled in that time, is one of a handful of mega donors who have been watching the still crowded Republican primary field play out. Other notable heavy-hitting contributors include gambling magnate Sheldon Adelson and hedge fund manager Paul Singer, who are also said to be major targets for Rubio. While Schwab himself has largely remained on the sidelines so far, his wife Helen Schwab has contributed $1.5 million to Right to Rise USA, the super PAC backing Bush. Both Helen and Charles Schwab are listed as one of 5 pairs of co-chairmen for the 2 events for the former Florida governor on October 20th in California. A luncheon in San Francisco and an evening reception in Woodside. And I looked it up because I was hoping that one of these events was the Please Clap event, but unfortunately it was a little bit farther on. But I could you imagine you give someone like several $1 million and then you go to their fucking event and you see them just like flounder and die immediately on stage?
So funny.
So
it also, I just have to say, it's insane that Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida. Because now, to be governor of Florida, you have to just bite the heads off chickens on stage and shit like that. A guy as boring as Jeb Bush ended up being. It's just funny to me. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No. So his horse does not end up winning. And so Schwab eventually, has to come around like all the other Never Trump Republicans, right, and make a choice. Like, do I take this principled stand or do I go to Trump? You got to imagine, if you're a Republican donor at that time, there were some rumblings, especially among the other candidates, right, about Trump being, this is he's a danger, he's crass, he's not going to actually put forward our agenda, he's going to destroy the economy, all this kind of stuff. So what's on your mind, right? Imagine you're Charles Schwab, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about looking forward to the future? Lifelong Republican, what are you going to do? To give you an idea of what maybe was part of his thought process. This is a piece from Barron's. This is after the election, so this is December 8th, 2016. It's a piece by Avi Salesman, and it is called Trump Victory Could Lead to Huge Gains for Charles Schwab. So I'll read here.
Imagine that.
Charles Schwab is known for charging low fees to people who want to invest their money in stocks or other financial products. It's a competitive business, and those fees will probably keep going down as brokers fight for a piece of the action. But Schwab makes money in other ways, too. And since Donald Trump's victory, the company's overall business is suddenly looking very promising. Schwab's basic business involves charging investors to trade, either on a per-trade basis or as a percentage of the assets they have invested. But analysts see big upside in Schwab's other revenue opportunities. For instance, when a client holds cash in an account, Schwab invests the cash in low-risk assets and takes part of that percentage. Since Donald Trump was elected president, interest rates have jumped. Rates tend to rise when Wall Street expects the economy to grow quickly, so those low-risk investments now bring in more cash. This net interest income from investing client cash and other assets like loans makes up 40% of Schwab's revenue. So any increase in interest rates is a huge boon. The rest of the article then details specifically how much money that would make, but there's an easy line to draw here. 40% of the business model is based on this way that could very quickly grow. And we know in that same amount of time, would you believe it or not, his own personal wealth doubled. Interesting thing. So imagine you're at that point, right? And you're looking at that information. What are you going to do? You didn't really back Trump, even though you still gave money to the RNC. How do you make sure that your interests continue to be secured? There's a big party that presidents get to have called an inauguration. And Trump's inauguration cost a huge amount of money. It was like over $100 million, which was double Obama's, which is really funny. So, would you believe it or not, Schwab gives a huge amount to Trump's inauguration. Pick a number. Guess a number.
All right. Well, he gave $9 million just to be mad at Obama. $20 million.
Oh, it's less than that.
$2 million.
Cut that.
$2 million.
Cut that. Make me. Okay.
No. You're keeping it.
He gave $50.
$2 million. $2 million.
I think Adelson gave $5 million. And he was the biggest one. Schwab gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration. Joining him in the $1 million club to Trump's inauguration was Chris Klein, who we covered all the way back in episode 2.
Oh my God!
Right? And we did that episode, the second episode of the show we ever did. That was like, I was in your place, Dwight, and I was like sweating.
Oh
like,
my God.
So
Oh,
bad.
that's right. That's right.
That's when I found out I had Lyme disease. That's how long ago this was.
Sorry.
And it was right after he died in the helicopter crash in the Bahamas, right?
That's right.
A great way to start the show.
Still dead.
Yeah, he's still dead. 2 years later, baby.
Stay winning. Yeah.
We've kept him in the grave. That's why you got to subscribe to the Patreon. Otherwise, if we're not around, the ghouls could come back. Anyway, so he gives $1 million to Trump's inauguration, right? Obviously, Trump ends up, we know, right? Like, and of course, he always was going to just basically, at least in an economic way, right? Just do the mainstream fucking Republican agenda, right? Which fundamentally hasn't changed in 40, 50 years, right?
Correct.
It's just been about gutting all of the elements of the social welfare state, which we talked about earlier, and just deregulating the shit out of the entire everything in the country. So, if you're donating $1 million at this point, right, you probably know, like, your investment is secure in terms of what your company's going to get out of it. But hey, like, what else could that $1 million buy? And so I'm going to quickly go into a story that was originally broke by the Huffington Post, but there's a more concise breakdown from Salon that's just like a paragraph, so it's just faster to read. So I'm going to read that by Matthew Rosa. This is from May 13th, 2017. Here's the little blurb here. Charles Schwab, who founded the famous Schwab brokerage firm in 1971, gave $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee. Now it has been reported that his 21-year-old granddaughter, Samantha Schwab, works for the Trump White House, for reasons we're sure are totally coincidental. More specifically, she seems to have some sort of position at the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. While Schwab isn't an official White House intern, her White House email address has the title volunteer in parentheses next to it, suggesting that her position isn't high-ranking either. In most cases, it's illegal for federal agencies to hire unpaid laborers, although it's doubtful that Schwab is suffering too much. End quote. So she was at Stanford at the time, and suddenly she gets this job. I don't think she'd even completed her degree or anything. She just gets a job at the White House, hilarious. Right? And one thing that Huffington Post brings up, which is, is a fair point, right, is like even having that kind of access, right, is like a huge boon down the line, right, because of the prestige of the office, which now, to me, is retrospect funny, because, it's the Trump White House. But nonetheless, right, it does give you some inside scoop on the levers of power and connections that otherwise are, that you can't really put a price on, right? That could set you up for life, theoretically. So that's, that only costs $1 million. What else? You could also say at this point, well, Schwab was like, again, he's a lifelong Republican. At the end of the day, he's just going to give some money to, Trump like he would give to any other candidate, but it's not really like a doubling down. It's not any kind of like strong commitment to a particular politics. But another funny bit, and for this, I'm just going to read from Wikipedia again because it's just such a succinct little paragraph. But obviously, there's a lot of details that you can find elsewhere about this. But just from Wikipedia, in July 2017, Schwab donated the maximum legal individual amount of $101,700 to the Republican National Committee's Legal Defense Fund that partially paid for the legal defense of President Donald Trump in the special counsel investigation of possible coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia.
I fucking love it.
So he gave the highest personal amount to help Trump's case.
Can you imagine giving any money to like one of the national committees, like the RNC or the DNC? Just a fucking black hole. Like it's only there to just fleece you.
So again, this is, it's a little bit further than just being like, I support the Republican Party, right? It's a little extra move. And if you want more confirmation of this, here's, I'll just read very briefly the headline and then a paragraph or two from this piece from The Hill, from 2018 by Emily Birnbaum. And the title is, FBI Official Overseeing Election Meddling Task Force Leaves Agency, Report. Just read the first couple paragraphs here. Senior FBI official Jeffrey Tricoli has left his position overseeing a government task force that's been looking into Russian interference in U.S. elections, according to the Wall Street Journal. Tricoli, who had been at the FBI for 18 years, reportedly left last month to take a job with Charles Schwab Corp.
No way.
So, I mean, again, I think we've talked about this a little bit on the show. I mean, I don't really make too much out of the whole like intensity of like the meddling and the hyperfixation on it. But nonetheless, the way to read this for me is like big political legal scandal embroiling the president. I gotta bail him out. Yep. What can I do? What can I donate money? How can I leverage it in other ways, right? To peel people off the investigation or whatever. Very curious.
That's literally the fucking scene in Wolf of Wall Street where like the FBI agent, he's like, I'll help you out, make a trade or whatever.
So, in all of this time, right, as we've been mentioning, this is, Schwab's wealth is doubling. It's going up during the Trump presidency. And I'm not going to actually read from this piece because it's mostly like, it's very poorly written. And it's also mostly a summary of a lot of the stuff that I've already covered. But I think that the title is very telling. And I got this from that same site, Dwight, RIA Biz.
Yep.
And this is a post from 2019 by Oisin Breen. And the title of this article is, Charles Schwab, a true American oligarch, shows no signs of slowing at 82, throwing his substantial fortune behind Donald Trump, hard-right politics, and his continuing financial services revolution. And then there's a picture. There's just a picture at the top of the article. And I don't know if I could show it here, but under the picture of him, it says, it's like a quote from him. It says, "I grew to hate the whole idea of limits." And it's just his like boring little face.
Yeah.
And again, so this is like, again, to think about like what we were talking about. Like you have more money than God at this point, right? Like your actual day-to-day like management of the things around you, like how wealth is communicated in that way, what your actual like imminent experience with reality is like safe. It's safe. Even if somehow there was a massive wealth tax imposed, you would be safe. Your life would continue as far, and at this point you're in your 80s. And so you could decide to just like take it easy, or you could be like, you know what? No more limits. I like this Trump guy, right? Like, I want to live big, baby. So, of course, the timing of all this is very funny and very curious. So that was from 2019. It's sort of like a profile on him. And now we're going to jump forward to January 2021. And I don't know if you guys can see where this is going.
Oh, God. Oh, no. No, please.
So this is from a piece from the New York Times by Lauren Hirsch, January 13th, 2021. Charles Schwab to end all political donations and shutter PAC. And here it's talking about the company, to be clear.
Okay.
Charles Schwab will shut down its political action committee, perhaps the most significant move among companies rethinking their political donations after last week's violence in the Capitol. So it's a bunch of like 3%ers coming after me as I'm reading this. Bikers for Trump breaking down my door. Schwab, one of the country's biggest brokerage firms with around 30 million customer accounts holding more than $6 trillion in assets, said it found the current, quote, hyper-partisan environment too complex to navigate without risk of distraction. Quote, we believe a clear and apolitical position is in the best interest of our clients, employees, stockholders, and the communities in which we operate, the company said on Wednesday. The company's PAC will no longer take contributions from employees or make financial contributions to lawmakers. It will donate the leftover funds to Boys and Girls Clubs of America and to historically black colleges and universities, organizations that Schwab has supported in the past.
I love the company presenting this as like Charles Schwab, the man, is like donating to like the Kyle Rittenhouse Defense Fund.
Yes. Schwab's PAC had around $114,000 in cash near the end of November, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. In the latest election cycle, Schwab's PAC gave $460,000 to federal candidates, roughly evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. So again, this is like a company-wide like PAC, right?
Right.
Among the recipients was the House Minority Leader, Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, one of the Republicans who voted against certifying President-elect Joe Biden's victory. The Lincoln Project, a group of anti-Trump conservatives, had featured Schwab in a recent campaign highlighting companies that donated to President Trump or the election objectives in Congress. Blah, blah, blah. It makes some things. Then the company hits the Lincoln Project back. This is like, the same 4 or 5 Republicans all yelling at each other as they age into irrelevance. So then it mentions basically that they sort of like they're trying to make this statement about we're going to be apolitical, and then a few months later, over the summer, Charles Schwab, the company, left the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, also as a way to be like, we're stepping back from politics, and that's kind of a big deal. The Chamber of Commerce is like the biggest fucking pro-business lobby.
Yeah.
In the country. So again, there's a question of like, well, is this really an apolitical move, or is this like a way, maybe like a silent protest at the behest of Schwab for the unfair treatment of our glorious leader, Donald Trump? Again, hard to say how it'll shake out. Certainly, if Trump runs again, I believe that Schwab would have no compunction about like putting half of his fortune into that or whatever.
100%.
Because again, it's at this point. I mean, he's like what? He's like 85. How
84, I think. 84.
Yeah. He's 84. I mean, it's like, again, what is the point of continuing to engage with this stuff?
Go enjoy your grandkids. Like, go fishing. Like, what the fuck is the point of like being the chairman of the board? You're gonna die any minute.
And my kind of big takeaway in sort of thinking about this is, a couple of weeks ago in episode 91, we did William Regnery II, and we talked about how this kind of weird heir fail son guy, right, with a relatively modest fortune compared to these like really big hard hitters, was able to place like a few $1 million in different places, a much smaller contribution overall than like somebody like Schwab or like the Kochs or whatever. But he got this like insane return on investment on it, right? That's the way that he always framed it, and the way we talked about it in terms of that episode, right? Like you could kind of create the intellectual backing for this like extreme white nationalist movement. And, I thought that was a very good and interesting episode. I think all of our episodes are very good and interesting. But I thought that was a particularly interesting one, given the connection there. But the thing with then like a guy like Schwab, like, again, Schwab is not like an out-and-out Nazi. He's not like outlandishly like bizarre. It's not like when we were talking about Peter Thiel, he's not like openly discussing the prospect of like harvesting the blood and organs of like healthy young people so that he stays alive forever, right? He's just kind of like a classic rich asshole.
Right.
But nonetheless, when push comes to shove, he's doubling down on a very specific brand of right-wing politics and seeing the utility of the allegiance of, a pro-business outlook being coupled with like an insane fucking fascistic like literally like no limits, like a no limits, like just imminently fucking corrupt politics.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, right, I do think that there is a meaningful distinction that can be drawn between certain kinds of political maneuvers versus others, right? But like, how different is it really if Schwab has been pumping money into, the Republican Party now for fucking 20 years? Like, essentially that is still driving extremism, right?
Yes.
Like that more or less is, and it's, you could argue it's even worse because it's on a bigger scale and it's a way to kind of more like politely launder those ideas, which is again what somebody like Regnery II was trying to do to begin with, right? Or even way back on, and I'm going to get the fucking episode thing because I'm on this kick because we're almost at our 100th episode.
Oh, buddy.
So I'm trying to like
Look at
be
us.
like, look at our like little catalog we've developed here. So give me a second. I gotta scroll down.
Yeah, he's just doing it in like a more conventional way.
Yes. Much like. Much like episode 18 that we did about Tucker Carlson, right? Right?
Yes.
It's that same kind of trying to put a presentable face on really like just fucking fundamentally cruel and evil politics.
Correct.
And putting a lot of money behind it. So, Schwab is not like, again, one of those go-to figures, is not somebody that immediately pops up in the mind when you think about like the uber wealthy or the elite. But again, he's like the 200th richest person in the fucking world.
Yes.
He lives in essentially like a, barter town of billionaires or whatever in California. That is like, some weaponized guarded cul-de-sac. And he's spending his years like aging into dementia and stuff, just like doubling down and pumping this money into this stuff. And again, that's why I like that one piece from RAA Biz where it's like he's going all in, and then like a year later it's like, well, the company has to step back a little bit.
Yes.
Maybe it's gone a little bit too far, but yeah, that's Schwab. That's Schwab in a nutshell.
Man, fucking Schwab it up.
I'm Schwabbed out. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, I've had enough of this guy.
Yeah, no. It's hey,
Had enough of this Schwab guy.
Schwab. I have nothing on that. I'm just.
I
don't
wonder,
like
this,
him.
that's
Schwab.
probably, that's probably also like he probably also considers like just donating to the Republican Party philanthropy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. I mean, again, in terms of him articulating his personal politics, he's not a super public guy when it comes to that. But like Chris, like you mentioned in that weird interview, he's like, oh yeah, like no wealth tax. That's gonna interfere with my ability to donate to the Republican Party. Like, what the fuck are you even doing with the money?
Exactly. A fucking joke. These people do not deserve their money. Again, like even if there was a 99% wealth tax, he would still be left with a paltry $120 million.
Right.
Like again, so unspendably large. Like you can't even fucking. That's not like that superliminal thing. Like you just can't even understand how much money that is.
Yeah.
Well, he lives in Atherton, California.
All right.
He has an address somewhere.
No.
Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be that precise. I mean, Atherton is, basically filled to the brim with Schwab.
All right. Enough. I think we've made our point. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Schwab you later, alligator.
500 subs are going off right here. 500 stocks is like an auction hit. Came off the block, I jumped off the stairs. I be with Charles Schwab, I'm being cautious with it. No ETN, I got an ETF. Exchange traded funds just to ease the stress. Why pick the stock? It ain't gonna beat index. The S&P index is just an easy flex. The funds I've invested in, yeah, they be mutual. Noble credit gang, that's if it's new to you. Flow too high, I think I need a crucible. Rapping about Schwab, this may not sound usual. Investments got treasuries in it, no cap. I got that raw, so I ain't deal with the tax. Compared to Schwab, the other ones cannot match. Expense ratios was looking too fat. Charge commission fees, they do not do that. I had membership points, but they wouldn't let me stack. They tried to tell me different, they left out the facts. The bank's been real good to me, got a new plan. Emerging stocks, small stocks in it. High yield bonds, I want every...